Okay, it's 7 o'clock. We're going to go ahead and get started with our free Q&A tonight. And I just wanted to go over a couple of fun things that I've been observing this growing season. 2022 has not been the easiest growing season. I have friends who farm in northern Utah, and they have been struggling. Their crops have been later. I have other people around the country who have asked me what's going on this year because things are not growing the way that they had hoped. And so everybody's been having a rough year. First of all, the one big observation I've seen here on my farm is that my landrace corn is growing much better than other varieties. A lot of my other corn completely died, but my landrace corn, which has been in a breeding project for years now to adapt to these harsh climates, is doing pretty good. It's not doing great, it's not doing exceptional, but it's doing pretty good. So that's pretty great. So this shows that we need to be growing our own varieties. Our last frost was June 15th this year in our climate, which is pretty late, but the old timers here say they can have a frost every month of the year here. So we do live in a pretty rough climate. All of our crops are struggling. Even the crops in the summer greenhouse and in our dug in the ground Wallafini style solar greenhouse, everything is not doing as well as it did last year. My compost is doing really great and the worms are multiplying. So that's a good thing. My seeds and seedlings are growing very fast this summer. I planted 4 days ago. Last night was the full moon. So I tried to plant 3 days before the full moon. So they're 4 days old and they are up and thriving. So that is pretty exciting. My strawberry plants in the greenhouse are giving me a good crop. It's interesting because everything else is doing so poorly. I wonder if they're struggling too, but it seems like they're doing pretty good. I don't have any disease or serious pest problems. So we're getting a good crop of strawberries. The strawberries outside, they are all dead. They're completely gone. That's why we build elaborate greenhouses, is to be able to ensure a good crop. The squirrel and mice population is very high this year. We have squirrels all over the place. It's like a plague of old. And there's lots of mice all over too, higher levels than normal. My 17-week class is going great. My students have passed all of their oral examinations with flying colors. They are doing excellent. These kids are learning ecology. They are understanding how to reverse desertification. They are learning how to green places like the Sahara. So that is pretty great. There are no natural deserts in North America, although there are 4 deserts in North America, but I do believe that they are man-made because of mismanagement of the past couple of 100 years. And I'm not blaming anybody. I'm just saying that's the fact of what has happened because we don't let the ground rest enough. People think it's because it's too much livestock. It's not. It's because there's not enough livestock. Look at the national parks where they've removed livestock decades and decades ago. Hardly any grass grows there, and people say that it's arid and it's natural. It's not. We are desertifying. And so we are learning how to reverse that using the tools that Mother Nature gave us. We've been building beaver dams to rehydrate the land, and we found a rattlesnake yesterday while we were doing that. So that was pretty awesome. My book manuscript is complete and it's in the final editing stages. Hopefully it will be available pretty soon, but I'm too stupid to get it ready to send it off. So I'm dependent on other wonderful people who are working on that. So we need to pray for them that my book can get out there to you guys. Our 700-acre forest is coming along. My seedlings are growing. I'd say probably 90% of my seeds came up, my tree seeds, and they're doing really well. I planted 1,000 tree seeds this year to get going, and 90% of them are growing and they're doing good. We're going to get those transplanted, and then we're going to plant 1,000 every year. We might get excited and plant 20,000 one year. I don't know, but it's coming along. It's a good project. We're going to try to rehydrate the land and to make it rain, because the more foliage you have growing, the more rain we can have. And excuse me, I have a wish and a hope and a dream and a desire. I wish I had a geek. Hopefully that's politically correct because I don't want to offend anybody. But I wish I had a computer/camera / marketing guru to just follow me around all day long, make videos of all the cool things we're doing, all the awesome interactions we're having with Mother Nature to rehydrate the land, to fix our water cycle, to take advantage of the sunlight, to fix our mineral cycle, and to put the ecological succession where we want so that the community dynamics of our ecosystem are thriving so that we can grow a maximum number of calories to feed the hungry people in the world. The wildlife here is wonderful. There's a lot of hummingbirds and hawks, and there's just a lot of cool things going on right now here where we live. So let's get into our presentation here tonight. Okay, so our educational program is moving along really good this year, and we have some great things happening. What we have is, I already gave you the update on the 17-week course, and I'm just so excited about that because these kids are learning more. They are answering questions that so many people do not know. And so it's great because they passed the oral examinations. It was so awesome. And our boot camp garden is a success. People came, they put the garden together. It is growing. Our students here have been eating out of it. So that is pretty great to be able to, just have food here on the ranch that people can enjoy. Here's my contact information. Make sure that you're going to my website and you are checking out what's happening with what we're doing and what we're offering to be able to create good, healthy, abundant, nutrient-dense food, and how you can be a part of that so that you can get the nutrition that you deserve. Also, join my Patreon page. I've been putting out right around 5 videos a week on gardening. And if you have ideas and thoughts about what you would like to see so that you can learn more, you can communicate with me on the Patreon page and request certain things, videos that I can make. Our Allen Savory events here on the ranch have been going great. We had our financial planning and our planned graze and our ecological monitoring. The people came out with their worldwide network of their, what do you even call it? I guess it's just, there's a computer database, and it has all the places that are being monitored globally, in all continents, probably not Antarctica, but all continents that are growing plants, to show whether we are desertifying or whether we are making the earth lush and green. And so we do that by the monitoring. And we had a class here, people came, they learned, and they were able to see how important that this work is to create ongoing food for our kids and grandkids. So our presentation tonight is all about, it's all about something. Here we go. It's all about the irrigation. So we're going to be talking about irrigation here tonight. So irrigation management, we want to focus on timers, okay? We want to focus on drip tape. We want to focus on sprinklers. We want to focus on more water in the summer, less water in the winter. Too much water causes a loss of oxygen, and that creates anaerobic conditions. If you do those things in your garden, you're going to be just fine. This is not going to be a class of how to put these things in here. Go look at somebody else's garden and you can see how to install this stuff. This class is going to be talking about fixing your soil, fixing your food system so that you can have amazing food. That's what we're talking about. We're not going to talk about what kind of sprinklers to get. I don't care what kind of sprinklers you get. Get the cheapest ones, get the most expensive ones. If water's coming out on your plants, it's fine. If your plants are getting watered, it's fine. Pick any method you want. It's totally fine. In this picture right here, you can see drip lines. I do enjoy drip lines. They soak slowly. They don't compact the soil. When you have heavy raindrops or heavy sprinklers, they tend to hit the soil and compact it, and it causes damaging results from heavy sprinkling. I do like sprinklers though, especially in greenhouses, because it cleans your food from getting too dusty. A lot of times food in greenhouses gets dirty as dust blows in. So it's good to have drip lines and to have sprinklers both. So both of those are really, really good. I do enjoy that. Go to the next slide here. Let's cover and talk about effective rainfall for a moment. Effective rainfall means that you get rain. Let's say you get a rainstorm or you irrigate for a while. Either one, it doesn't matter. Let's just either scenario, either rain or you're irrigating. Let's say you got 1 inch of water on your soil or your garden, your farm, your lawn, your grassland, your trees, whatever. You get 1 inch comes down on your rain. Now let's ask a question. Are you needing to water in 2 days? If the answer is yes, you probably don't have effective rainfall / irrigation. From 1 inch of rain, you should be able to grow plants, even in hot summer weather, for a week without another inch of rain. With great soils, maybe 2 weeks. So let's say you have a really big rain. Let's say you have 10 inches of rain, and I've used this scenario several times in this class before, because my son lives in Cedar City, Utah. He was there during a 10-inch rain after, 9 months of no rain. The community got together, they fasted and prayed for rain, which I participated in that. I think it's great to petition Heavenly Father for rain. And the rains came, they got 10 inches of rain. 2 weeks later, everything was dried up again, and they were praying for rain again. And the government was sending them catastrophe money because that 10 inches of rain flooded everything. That rain should not have flooded. That rain should have infiltrated into the soil. Effective rainfall or effective rainfall and effective irrigation, they infiltrate. They go into the soil. All right? Whether it's a 1/2 inch or whether it's 200 inches, it needs to infiltrate. Now, anytime you get somewhere around 6 inches or above, depending on how fast it comes, the soil starts to reach saturation. It won't infiltrate anymore. So do I really expect that 10 inches of rain would have infiltrated there in Cedar City? No, not really. But the problem is, I don't think 1/4 inch infiltrated in most of that area, because the ground was hard like concrete. The soil was not functioning. It's part of the Great Basin Desert down there. And the soils have been compacted for years, for decades. So let's just say half of that would have infiltrated. If 5 inches would have infiltrated, the other 5 inches would have ran off and would not have caused millions of dollars worth of damage. So let's just think about what is effective irrigation. The water needs to infiltrate, and there's only 2 ways that the water should leave the soil. It should leave the soil through springs, sponges, watering holes, and wells. And all of those are infiltration, okay? If it is running off the surface, you should be working on your water cycle. You should be working on getting your soils to the point where they will infiltrate better. You have work to do. If you're getting, let's say you got 10 inches of rain in 48 hours and you have a lot of runoff and flooding, you do not have effective rainfall and you do not have a functioning soil. It should, in 48 hours, it should all go through the soil into springs, be held in sponges and bogs. It should be in watering holes, in ponds and wells. You should not have flooding, okay? So that's the first way, is infiltration. That's the only way it should leave the soil. The second way that water should leave the soil, or it's okay for it to leave the soil, is through transevaporation. And that means it goes through a plant. So a plant absorbs it through the roots, and then the plant takes up that water into the plant. And then when the stomata open during the process of photosynthesis, water vapor leaves the plant. And that's a good way for water to leave the soil. And those are the only two acceptable ways from an ecological point of view. Those are the only two acceptable ways of water leaving. Water should not evaporate from the soil. It should not run off during an irrigation event or a rainfall event or a snowmelt event, anything like that. So how do we keep the soil in such a way that water will not evaporate? It needs to be covered. You need to have a thick layer of what we call a detritus sphere. There are 5 spheres in the soil, and the detritus sphere is extremely important. That is your dead organic matter on top. Most gardeners know that if you have a nice thick mulch of wood chips or shredded bark or grass clippings or old leaves or compost on top of your garden, that it helps to keep the plants growing better. It keeps the moisture in the ground. And that is true. We need to keep that soil covered. Not only do we need the detritus sphere, we also need to keep the ground covered with living plants. So both dead and living plants, keep that ground covered all the time. What about wintertime? Should you have living plants in the wintertime? Yes, you should have living plants in the wintertime. Absolutely, it's very important. You need to have living plants in there all of the time. So let's look at this slide right here. Just moving on here with the whole idea of this irrigation and effective rainfall. One of my students, well, I have several students. I've had 4 students here at various times during my 17-week course so far this summer. Some of them are full-time, some of them have come and gone because they couldn't come for the whole time. And one of them told me something pretty interesting, and they were from Weber County, Utah, which is just north of Salt Lake, up in the Ogden area. And they said that because of the drought, there's a lot of people in their community who have decided to do xeriscaping in their lawns. And so they remove their lawns and they're covering the lawns with landscape fabric. They're putting down gravel. They're making it look, they're landscaping their yards to look like deserts. And this is fascinating to me. I mean, I know people do this. If you've ever been to a place like Phoenix, Arizona, a lot of the other, you know, the deep desert areas, a lot of people, they landscape like this because it kind of, it's cool, you know, it goes along with kind of the place where they live, the climates where they live. But the reason they're doing it is, I think it's crazy. It does, because, and I'm going to explain why. So they are going from a lawn, probably Kentucky bluegrass. Those are very common. It's very common grass to plant in lawns, and it takes a lot of water during the summer to keep your Kentucky bluegrass and a lot of other good lawn grasses green. And so they're watering a lot to keep their grasses green, and it's costing them a lot of money. And so they're saving money. And so that's fine. Go ahead and save the money. I don't have a problem with that. But they think they are being socially and environmentally.
Go back in again.
Melanie, is that you?
It is.
Would you do me a favor and mute yourself?
I sure will. John lost you for some reason. We don't know why.
Well, I
Thank
didn't
you.
kick him out.
Nope, you sure didn't.
Okay.
Okay, that's why I jumped back in, and I'm sorry. I will mute. Bye.
So the people who are creating these xeriscaping in their lawns in a lot of places where they have historically had beautiful lawns in their landscaping. The reason they're doing it is because of a mentality of thinking that they are going to help the drought. And in reality, they are going to create a drought. They are going to make it worse. So this tells me two things. Number one, people simply do not understand ecology. We are very, very deficient in understanding ecology in our educations. And I mean, the national park system does the same thing. And it's insane because we are creating deserts. The worst thing we can do is create a desert. And so let me explain the science of what's happening. But first, I'm going to go through this scenario, and then I'll tell the science. So what we have happening is we have people with lawns who are experiencing a drought. And so they're afraid they're going to run out of water, which is legitimate because it takes a lot of water to keep all these lawns green. And so instead of doing something responsible, because they don't know, and so I'm not blaming anyone, they simply don't know. It's pure, innocent ignorance, okay? So nobody's in trouble here. They create something like a desert in their yard with a xeriscape. And it has very few plants, very, very few plants. What it has is mostly stones, it has rocks, it has boulders, it has sand. And it looks really nice. The landscape architects are beautiful. They make it look nice. Okay, so it's looking good. But once they are done, here's the science of what actually happens when somebody converts their world, their little yard or their big yard, from a lawn to a xeriscape. The sun shines down in the summertime, that hot sun comes down and it hits the ground. And then the hot air rises off of the rocks, the stones, and the sand, because those are bare ground. We never, 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 never want bare ground. Bare ground causes drought, okay? So the sun hits the ground, and then that hot air rises up. And when a rain cloud comes along from the Pacific Ocean, it comes across California and Nevada, and it hits my friends who have xeriscaped in northern Utah, and it hits, and that hot air is rising, and those rain clouds go to where that hot air is rising. And what does the hot air do? It pushes the cloud further east. It speeds up that jet stream. I don't know that it really speeds it up, but it fuels it, and those rain clouds keep going. And so what is the result? The result is that the Western United States have more droughts and increasing droughts throughout my lifetime, and the Midwest has more and more flooding throughout my lifetime. And so we think in our innocent ignorance, I'm not blaming people, but we are making a mistake, okay? When we take out our lawn and turn it into bare ground, the air that rises is hotter. We will have more rain. We will have less rain. We will have more clouds moving past us. So am I saying to keep watering all the Kentucky bluegrass that takes tons of water? I'm not saying that. In fact, I am all for xeriscaping, but you have to cover the sand and the stones, the boulders, the gravel. You have to cover it with plants. And people always say, well, what is a grass that is drought resistant? And so I put it on this slide. Things like fine fescue, buffalo grass, and blue grama grass. Those are grasses that you can grow in a lawn and water them maybe 1/10 of the time as Kentucky bluegrass, okay? But there are other beautiful plants. There are penstemons that grow wild all through the Great Basin Desert with no irrigation at all. They're tall, they're beautiful, they're glorious, and they look great in people's yards. They're certainly not a lawn. They get anywhere from 2 to 4 feet tall, depending on the species of penstemon and all the different varieties. But we need to be focusing on climate appropriate species for the growing zones where we live. but never, never, never remove plants. Because if the sun bears down in the summertime and it hits plants, guess what happens? It'll be a hot summer day, but you don't get that same hot effect of that rising air blasting up like you do if it's hitting bare earth. So we need more trees. We need more plants. We absolutely need to cover all soil with plants. I think that every house should be covered with foliage. We need to go back to sod roofs. And that makes me eccentric and a wacko to say that. But if we did that, we could change our climate. I don't really think that in our day there's a reason, like in the next 50 years, there is no reason to have any open parking lot with black pavement. I think all parking lots should have a roof on them and they're covered with xeriscaping type plants. This would be a complete change in our culture, and it would be a good one. We could raise food there. We could have parks there. We could have gathering places. We could have all kinds of good things happening on the roofs of all these buildings. There's a lot of really sophisticated weather equipment in St. Louis, and they've probably all cities have this kind of equipment. It's not that St. Louis is unique. It's just that I know of this because I know some people from St. Louis have been talking about this. But in St. Louis, they've been watching the weather patterns for decades now. And the big clouds, the big thunderstorms will be coming across Missouri from the west to the east. And when they hit St. Louis, they split and it goes around. The clouds split. The city of St. Louis doesn't get a lot of rain compared to around it. It does get rain, but not like other places, like outside of the city. And the scientists who've noticed this phenomenon, and they have figured out that it's what I just explained. That hot sun in the summertime comes down, it hits all the bare surfaces of concrete and steel and pavement and bare things that are not plant-based. And that super hot air rises up, and when the clouds come, it pushes those clouds away and it rains somewhere else. So if we want it to rain, we need to have green growing plants in our plantings. So people are going to hear this and somebody's going to say, oh man, that DeMille guy, he hates xeriscaping. No, I don't. I love xeriscaping, but we have to use plants. If I'm in an airplane and I look down and I see bare ground, if I see a stone or a boulder or dirt or sand, I don't like it. That is not good landscaping. We should see nothing except good foliage, and that would turn around our ecosystems so that we would stop the floods in the Midwest and we would have more evenly distributed rain throughout the Western United States. And this is not me making this up. This is just solid science, the best we know. Okay. I just wanted to share this with you. This is from one of the permaculture websites, and I thought this was an appropriate thing to show you, just because this is one of the ways in which we can do xeriscaping. We need our overstory plants. These are the big trees that are on top of our houses, that are shading our homes, that are making our power bill lower. And then we have our understory tree layer. These are the trees that are the same size or the same height of our homes. And then we have our bushes down in there, the shrubs, and they're all around. And then we have our other plants, and then we have our roots. And then of course, there's the vines that grow up around through all the trees. And when we have all these 7 elements within our in our own landscapes, we can have very beautiful and wonderful and productive, food producing systems, in whether we live in a town or whether we live on thousands of acres. But this is just a good basic guide to get started. And, so that's just there for fun. I'm going to move on to the next one here. So when we're looking at irrigation management, we always want to keep these things in mind. This is one of the slides that we look at almost every day in our class with our 17-week kids here. But I just wanted to put it in here with our irrigation management tonight because water is everything. When we have a desert, when we have an ecosystem that changes from productive land growing plants into a desert, it destroys communities, it destroys civilizations, and things change. When we look at the Sahara Desert, I mean, educated ecologists know, they all pretty much agree that the Sahara Desert, which is the biggest desert in the world, it is a man-made desert. But it's been a desert our entire lives, so we don't think about that. But let's go back to the Bible. Let's read the descriptions of Egypt when we read the Bible. Let's read 40 or 50 other ancient texts. There's libraries in the Middle East in all kinds of different languages that nobody reads because nobody can read those ancient languages. It's so fascinating to think about the things that are written in there. But when we get a good scholar and they can tell us what some of these things say, and they're looking back thousands of years in some of these places that are now nothing but sand and scorpions and a few vipers, the descriptions of these places is very different than the way they look today. But these are the things that we focus on to stop the desertification process. And I'm not going to spend time on this slide tonight. Many of these classes that we have talked about in the past, we've already covered this stuff. We've already covered the 5 spheres. We've already talked about the 4 ecological processes. But I do just want to point out that it's very important that we understand the interactions between every one of these things. So I've got these labeled 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 here. And when we had our oral examination, this was the oral examination, and I asked about 100 questions from this page. They had to define every one of these. They had 6 seconds to define this. And so I would just ask them, what is the definition of bacteria? They would tell me. They had 6 seconds to give me a viable answer from a worldview of ecology, not agriculture, but ecology. And then we would go through this and I would ask them, what is the function of each of these? They had 6 seconds to answer and give me a proper function of every one of these. And then they had to tell me the interaction between these. And so I would just pick random interactions until I got to 100 questions. So I would say, what is the interaction between Inca trades and ecological succession? They had 6 seconds to give me a good answer. And I was pretty impressed with these kids who were here because at the end of their first month here, they all got straight A's on this. They only missed a couple of questions. And by missed it, they actually knew, they just couldn't spit it out within 6 seconds. So it was pretty exciting. And it gives me hope to think that we can train up a generation of people who will see the world so differently, because we have plenty of people who are seeing the world from a political point of view, and those people are angry and their solutions are not going to help us in the future. I don't see a good political solution out there. And then I see people in the agricultural world who come with an agricultural point of view, and they're kind of angry too. And the people they're angry at are the political side. So it's fascinating. But they don't have really good answers either, because their costs are skyrocketing right now. Imagine if you were a farmer right now trying to grow a crop. Look at the price of fuel to operate your tractors. And if you're driving through your field 7, 8, 9 passes, you need to cut those passes down. You need to get it down to 2 passes, maybe 3 passes to grow that crop. You know, you would have a planting pass and a harvest pass. Those are 2 good appropriate passes to pass through that field. But a lot of people, they're doing 1 tillage, 2 tillage, and then they're doing a planting, and then they're doing a spraying for weeds, and then a spraying for bugs, and then they're going back in to get weeds again, and this starts adding up. And then, you know, finally past 9 could be their harvest, and then after that they're going through another tillage at the end of the year. We have to change this. Farmers will be going out of business, or they will be highly subsidized from other things. And that creates a very huge strain on our economy if we have to subsidize our food, and food cannot be a legitimate business that stands on its own 2 feet. So this gives me great hope that we are able to educate people in a way that they understand these 4 ecological processes, and that they can build these 5 spheres. And so I have a joke I always say, and I say, okay, so here's what we're going to do. And if you look at number 3 here, you can see that it says soil health principles. And in red, these are the things we do. And those things are the only things we can do. Because if you look at number 1, here's the organism groups. We can't go out in the field and we can't microarthropod. You can't do it. I make my students stand up and I say, okay, today you are going to bacteria. Do it right now. They stand there and they giggle, and it's silly, and I'm a weird teacher. But we are instilling in the minds of these young people that there are only specific things we can do. And so those are the management tools that we are using, which is number 3. We are using mindfulness. We are having the proper context for our goals as a food producer. We are doing minimal tillage. We are keeping our ground covered with a healthy detritosphere and living plants. We're keeping living roots in the soil all the time, all 12 months of the year, so that we are maximizing the sunlight that's coming down. That way we don't need to buy fertilizer. And that sounds crazy to people from an agricultural background. I came from an agricultural worldview, and so I get it. I understand that. But when we look at this from an ecological worldview, it makes so much sense. It makes it so much easier to actually produce the food. Okay, and there's our slide for next week. So let's open this up to questions and answers. And you guys can ask me your questions if you have any. And so you can just unmute yourself and ask, or you can type into the chat. And I already have a question here in the chat, so I'm going to read this first and we will start talking about it. So Melanie asks, what are some drought plants that will grow in between large boulders or rocks? What do you think of succulents? Okay, if it will grow, then I love it. The problem with our ecosystems today is plants are stopping growing in places where they have traditionally grown. And so succulents are fine. They're great. They're good. You can water a succulent every 8 to 10, 15 weeks. Some succulents, like in the bad ones, you go down into like the really hot deserts, go to California, go to Mexico, you know, the Sonoran Desert, the Mojave Desert, and you will find plants that get water in the winter, and that's the only time. They can go 8, 9, 10 months with no moisture. And so that's good. That is good because it is a living plant that is covering the soil. And that's what we need. We need to be covering it. So what are drought plants that'll grow between large boulders and rocks? If it's a really large boulder, like really tall, you probably should be planting some trees that will grow above the height of that boulder and shade the boulder so that the boulder's not getting, you know, getting covered with like the sunlight. You don't want the sunlight to hit the boulder. You want the sunlight to hit the tree and shade the boulder. That is the proper thing to happen. So weeds, absolutely, Melanie. Weeds are the best thing ever. People
Really?
hate weeds. Oh,
Yeah.
yes. Weeds are your first responder. Ecologically speaking, when if there is a natural catastrophe like a forest fire or a landslide or anything else, so let's just say a tillage event, a human tills the ground. Ecology Mother Nature has not figured out that humans are are doing something good. Okay. Now you got to realize that I'm coming at this from an ecological point of view. So Mother Nature has been figuring this out for tens of thousands of years or whatever, millions of years. And humans have been on the scene tilling for a very short amount of time. So Mother Nature sees a tillage event as a natural disaster. So when we weed when we till the ground and we kill the weeds with a tillage event, it just makes more weeds stimulated to grow. And so ecologically thinking, weeds are our first responders to heal the soil. When a forest fire goes through, what are the first plants that grow? They're not the plants that were growing there for 50 years of that forest. And people go in there and they think, man, where did all these weeds come from? They haven't been here forever. Well, those weed seeds may have been sitting there dormant for 300 years. A lot of weeds can last for a long time. So think of them as the ecological first responder to fix a natural disaster. Just like when there's a disaster in a city, somebody calls 911, who shows up? The policeman, the fireman, the first responders show up to take care of a disaster. And so ecologically speaking, weeds show up. So if we're going to think of this in the sense of stopping the world from becoming a desert, because, you know, in our grandchildren's lifetime, that could happen. We could become Mars. I don't think it will, because I think we are smarter than that. And I've read this story, and the earth receives its paradisical glory. And this is how it happens: is we grow more plants instead of creating more sand. So I'm very optimistic about it. So yes, I love weeds. Weeds are great. Weeds are good. Weeds are covering the ground. There is no plant that will cover bare ground quicker than a lamb's quarters and an amaranth and a morning glory and quack grass, all of these horrible weeds that we as gardeners tend to hate. That will heal the soil quicker than ever. So are they bad? Well, they're kind of bad if we're thinking of this as a farmer trying to grow food, but I don't really think they're bad. I think they are an indicator telling me what succession my farm is in. So if I go out there and I'm growing my crops and I have a bad weed problem with early succession plants, which is what a weed is, then that's telling me that I need to get more fungus in the soil. My fungus and protozoa and nematodes are a very low population, or maybe not existent, and so my soil is not functioning. And usually where I see a high weed population, my 5 spheres are not functioning well. I don't have a detritus sphere. I dig with a shovel and the dirt just falls apart. It's not held together with glomalin. The agrotosphere is not there. The porosphere is not there. The rhizosphere is very shallow. There's no earthworms. There are very few earthworms. So weeds are an indicator telling me that I need to get busy and get to work and fix my water cycle. Okay, so Ezekiel said, what are some drought plants that will grow? That's what Melanie said. Where's Ezekiel's? It was here. Why did that leave? Let me scroll around for a minute. Okay, here it is. What about covering large stones with boulders or lichen or drought hardy moss? Those are excellent things to do. If you could, if you could get those established, the lichens and mosses established on the rocks, that would certainly be a good thing to do. The problem with that is we're doing it, we are creating a lush, beautiful green paradise in the slowest way possible if we do that. It's much better to plant some super fast growing trees like some Chinese elms, and people are going to hear this and they are going to want to assassinate me because there's a lot of haters out there who really don't like the Chinese elm, but they're a beautiful early succession tree. They will grow in early succession and they will reach canopy in 4 or 5 years. They will be shading the ground. The limbs of the tree fall off and die prematurely, giving biomass to the ground. That's why people don't like them, is they're ugly in your landscape. And then eventually they get diseased in 10, 15 years, and the whole tree dies. But by then, they have fulfilled the ecological role of being a nurse tree or a mother tree to all of the other plants that could not grow without a bigger tree helping to protect it. So grow these super fast trees, and in a decade, remove them. The biomass of all that wood goes into the soil to feed the fungus, the nematodes, the microarthropods, the earthworms, and now you have jumped succession in less than a decade from bare dirt all the way to like late succession where your grapevines and your blackberries and all blueberries, a lot of the plants that are super healthy, that are hard to grow, are absolutely thriving. So would I plant the lichens and mosses? No, I wouldn't. I would plant something else, because if you do it the lichen and moss route, it could take 70 or 80 or 1,000 years. I mean, that's how Mother Nature does it, but there's a lot of other things you could plant. I mean, here's another thing that most people would hate. Plant a lot of morning glory around it. Those morning glories will grow and they will cover those boulders. They'll climb up on them and cover them with green foliage. You know, now, is that an insane thing to say? It kind of is, but ecologically speaking, we can stop desertification much quicker if we use some of these very vicious, fast growing, evil early succession weeds that gardeners absolutely hate. We can change the landscape and we can change it fast. Okay, the boulders are a retaining wall used in terracing a steep hill in the drought desert Utah area. Yeah, cover them up. Get some plants growing to sprawl all across them. There's a lot of herbs that would probably help to grow across I don't even know what they are. Northern Utah, I don't know if you could get rosemary, but there's a rosemary, probably wouldn't grow there. I know it grows good in St. George, but that's totally different climate. But there's a rosemary called prostratus, and you plant it on the top of the retaining wall in the soil between the boulders, and it grows downward over the top of the boulder. So that's Rosemarinus prostratus. Okay, Ezekiel said, what about covering large stones and boulders with, oh, I just read that one. Oh yes, he posted it again because I was complaining that it left. All right, so yeah, all right. I think I read all these. What caused huge amounts of weeds in the Northwest Missouri area this year? I haven't heard of lots of weeds in Northwest Missouri area this year, but I will tell you I'll tell you how Mother Nature works, and then you tell me. If there is an event that creates bare ground, your weeds will grow. If there is an event that creates a stimulus of bacteria, weeds will germinate and grow. And if there is an event that gets lots of nitrate out there in the environment, weeds will grow like crazy. So if farmers are putting lots of nitrate on their fields, they will have a weed problem. And they do that every year. It's a common agricultural practice. If farmers till their fields, they will have huge weeds. And they do that every year. So I don't know, but those are the main causes. So I don't know. I haven't heard of anything else. This is the first I've heard of a huge weed problem more than normal in Northwest Missouri, but yeah, that's interesting. Ezekiel said, should you plant fast growing trees and old growth trees at the same time? Yes. Context, the soil health principle of understanding your context is really important here. If I was in the Midwestern United States, like Melanie from Missouri, yes, I would plant your old growth trees, your pioneer species, your fast growing ones, and your later succession, early succession, plant them all at the same time. It's a good thing to do. In the Great Basin Desert, here where I live in Nevada, if you're from Nevada, Utah, Southern Oregon, Southern Idaho, down into parts of Arizona, that's the borders of the Great Basin Desert. If you're in that area, I would plant your early succession trees, your pioneer species trees. Those are the same thing. I would plant those and get them going so they're about 6 feet high and casting some shade. And then, so that could be anywhere from 3 to 10 years, depending on the species you're growing. And then you plant your later succession trees because you need some shade coming off of those bigger trees to help the other trees get going. So context matters on when you are planting which type of successional tree. Okay. Melanie says, how can one dig up a volunteer peach tree that is now 7 feet tall against a fence? You're going to want to dig that up during the dormant season when the leaves have naturally fallen off. So in the winter time, you're going to dig it up. If it's 7 feet tall, you're going to need a machine. So you're going to need a backhoe or an excavator, and you are going to need to dig super deep on one side of it. You're probably going to have to go about 4 feet deep on one side. And then you're going to dig on the other 3 sides a little bit, and you're going to try to tip it over into your 4-foot deep hole that you've dug. So you tip it straight over onto a great big piece of very strong tarp. Keep that root ball on it, and then slide the root ball, or I mean the tarp under that root ball, bring the tarp around the root ball, tie it with a rope, and then lift it out with your excavator. If you remove the root ball from those roots, you might as well just cut down the tree and kill it, because you're going to kill it if you bare root it. You have to keep the soil around those roots. So a 7-foot tall tree, I'm guessing you're going to need a root ball that's about 3 to 4 feet deep and about 4 feet around 4 to 5 feet in a circle around the tree on the top. So it's going to be big, it's going to be heavy, it's probably going to weigh 500 pounds, maybe more when you pull that out of the ground. There's no way to do it by hand. You have to have a machine. So, you know, if it's against a fence, you're just going to have to repair the fence or whatever. Rosemary. Rosemaryana prostratus. I don't know if I know how to do this. So rosemary, Prostratus. There you go. It's on there, prostratus. I don't know if that's spelled right, but if you could just say that in a Google search and it'll come up. Just say the Latin name of rosemary and it'll come up. But prostratus is the subspecies you want, because there's a lot of different types of rosemary. Prostratus, it sounds like prostrate or laying down or fall, you know, spreading out. So they call it prostratus to try to be clever. Scientists try to get clever with their Latin names, so that's a fun one. Okay, let me look at these. Volunteer peach tree against a fence. I'm trying to scroll down. Ragweed in Northwest Missouri, even in footpaths. You know, things are different every year. Like 4 or 5 years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, there was a huge jackrabbit population here in the Great Basin Desert. They were everywhere. It was an epidemic. Like 2 years ago, there were skunks everywhere. This year, there's mice and everywhere. And the squirrel population's higher than normal too. So things just go in cycles. You know, I don't know. Things just go in cycles. It's all I can say about that. Ezekiel said, is there a way to reclaim soil that has been both poisoned with petroleum waste dumping and is highly compacted? No plants will grow there naturally except one lonely patch of sagebrush. There is a thing that we do called bioremediation. I'll repeat that, bioremediation. And that's where we take biology. So we make a really good compost. We make a really good, healthy, active thermophilic compost, and we try to gather ingredients from a lot of areas, not statewide, but like I would go maybe 7 or 8 miles within my region and I would get clumps and bits of trees and shrubs and wood and all types of plant material, living plants, dead plants, because then when I start my compost pile, I am starting out with a wide variety of microbes living on those just plant surface material. Okay, and then I build my compost. I get it nice and hot. I go through a good thermophilic recipe, and I'll turn it 6-7 times, whatever, and then I will let that sit for a year, because during the year that it's sitting, it's going to be collecting from the atmosphere spores of all kinds of bacteria, spores and cysts that just are in the environment, they're in the air, mostly bacteria and fungus, and it will grow all these guys. And then we take that and we would cover that nasty, compacted and poisoned soil, that contaminated soil. We would put 6 to 10 inches of that compost on top of it. So if it's a place where a car was sitting, or if it's in your yard, this would work. But if you're talking about a couple of acres, then you couldn't put that thick on, and you would have to do something else. But if it's just in your yard, you could put on that thick, really good compost. And when you do that, you plant plants in it, and you put some resilient plants in there. And that large collection of bacteria, fungus, protozoa, nematodes, microarthropods will start working. And the mineralizers that are in there will start mineralizing the sand, silts, and clays to feed your plants. And the decomposers in there will start decomposing things, and they will decompose toxins. So there's a lot of people who are doing bioremediation. When there's oil spills nowadays, there's certain bacteria they will introduce to the oceans and along the seashores where things are contaminated, that help to digest and to bioremediate some of these toxins that we create, we being humans create. So that's what I would do. I would create a compost, and I'd get it out there and plant a big garden on it. Any kind of plant that you can get to grow there, get it growing. And so that's what you would want to do. Okay. You wouldn't just put the compost out there without living plants, because then not as many microbes would be growing. Microbes grow, you have more species of microbes growing when there's living plants in the soil. So you need to be growing plants along with this process. Melanie says, is there any medical value to ragweed? I have no idea. Our compost bin isn't getting hot. Why? Okay, your compost has to have a big enough mass to heat up. So if you have a small bin, it probably won't heat up. Most commercial compost bins are these little tiny things, and they don't work very well. It's something that people sell. It's something that, I don't know. I hate to discourage people, because composting is a good thing to do, but compost bins aren't a very good tool. You know, you have to have a big mass. You have to have something about 3 feet wide and 3 feet tall, kind of a minimum. When I start a compost pile, it's 4 feet wide and about 5 or 6 feet tall. So, you know, it's big. It's a big mass of material. And then you have to have your moisture levels at 50%. If you're at 80, 90% moisture, it has to lose moisture to heat up. If you're at 40, 30, 20% moisture, it's not going to heat up. It's too dry. You've got to be in that magic range of 50, 60% moisture. And you have to have brown components, which are woody things for the fungus to eat. You have to have green components, which are the food for the bacteria to eat. And then you have to have a little bit, like 10% of that pile needs to be a high nitrogen component for your bacteria to multiply rapidly, to make it really hot. If it's not multiplying rapidly, it doesn't get hot. So moisture, mass, and high nitrogen. So those are the reasons it doesn't heat up. Okay. All right, let me look here. Let me see where we're at. Ezekiel says, it is a 4-acre lot that used to have an old car graveyard and mechanic shop. Yeah, there's probably a lot of toxins in there. That's what I'd do. Get it covered with lots of microbes, start growing plants. Good plants to grow there would be Chinese elms. Another good plant to grow there would be a lot of early succession plants. See if you could get some ragweed. See if you can get morning glories, thistles. You know, if it's in a municipal place, I'm telling you all the things that are illegal to plant there. But ecologically speaking, those are plants that will start growing in places that need to be fixed up. Melanie says, our front yard lawn in Missouri now has weeds, but mostly hard, deeply cracked clay after the area was dug up 3 years ago to put in a sump pump that is 8 feet or more. What can we do? Okay. Get you a dump truck load of wood chips and cover that entire area with 3 to 4 inches of wood chips. Turn on a sprinkler and sprinkle it, and get 50 different species of weed seeds and put them all out there. And when they start growing, start mowing it with a lawnmower. That might sound crazy to tell you to put weed seeds out there, but there are first responders and it'll start growing. After 2 years, there'll be no weeds, but your grass will start growing luscious. If you're wanting to grow perennials or like annual food crops, like gardening things, then you could just start with that. Just put out, get a bucket full of seed that are all edibles, plant those out there, see what will grow, you know, see what'll happen. Your brassicas will probably grow. They're an early succession crop. So that's all the cabbage families. You could cover the whole thing with kale, collards. Your mustards would grow out there. Radishes would probably grow out there. How do you mow on wood chips? Well, that's easy. The wood chips are flat, just like the ground. You just drive your mower right across it. It's just fine. It's just flat. It's no different than mowing on sand. You know, they're just little wood chips. So I'm not talking about tree limbs. I'm talking about wood chips that are shredded up. You can get them from free, especially in Missouri, because there's probably, for every power company out there, they have a fleet of men and trucks that pull those chippers, and they're always cutting back the trees that are growing up around all the power poles. There's millions of miles of power lines all through the United States. So when you see one of those big trucks and they're cutting down all the limbs underneath the power poles and they're shredding them up, and that shredder's blowing it into the back of that truck, if they take that to a landfill, they usually have to pay. So if you say, hey, come dump this at my place, if they're within a few miles of your house, they'll just dump it at your place for free. They're glad to do it because it saves them money. Okay, let me go to the next question here. I lost my place. I'm scrolling around. Oh yeah, you're right. The university there, they burn it in their big burner. All right, so you have some competition. You may have to buy them. Sorry. I would still flag them down when you see them on the street. You know, you may have a driver there who hates the university, and they'd be like, yeah, I'll take it to you instead. You never know what people think. People are funny. They might be glad to take a trip or take them to your yard. Ezekiel said, how would you manage several acres of mid to high mountain pine forest? Would you consider running hogs through there for animal impact? About 20 acres. It just depends. You know, here again, we got to go back to context. You're telling me one little tiny detail of a great big picture. What is it you're trying to do? You know, Are you having problems with the land? Are you trying to fix the land? Are you trying to change it? Are you trying to leave it pristine? Is there bare ground there? Is it overgrown? Are the pine trees dying? You know, do you want to switch succession from pine trees to a grassland? Do you want to change the pine trees to a deciduous forest? So there's a lot in the context of how would I manage several acres of mid to high mountain pine forest. I'll tell you how I'd manage it. I'd leave it alone, plant wildflowers. But that's because I have an ideal of what I want, you know. So questions like that, I always just have to ask you back the question, what are your goals? What is your purpose? What are you trying to do? Are you starting a food producing farm in a mid to high mountain pine forest? Sell it and go to the valleys where you can actually grow food. Food doesn't grow well in mid to high mountain pine areas. It's very hard to grow food in the high mountains, the Rocky Mountains. It's a rough place to grow food. Go to the valleys, you know. So it just depends on your context. Okay. What time is it? It is after 8 o'clock. I think we'll probably start wrapping this up. If you have any, I hope, let me just look here real quick, make sure I didn't miss any questions. I think I got everybody's question here tonight. It looks like I did. Zeke, go ahead and ask another question. Okay, he's typing in a question here. Do you have any suggestions for replacement of driveways? I wonder what that means. What do you mean by replacing a driveway that don't involve concrete or asphalt? What about putting up, what about new architecture where we don't have driveways anymore? Why don't we cover all of our driveways with sod roofs? People want to protect their cars anyway. Wouldn't that work? Why aren't we growing strawberries on top of our roofs? Why are our roofs have a steep pitch to get the snow off? Let's build stronger walls and have flat roofs with retaining walls along the outside. And we have 3 feet of growing, beautiful growing soil up there. And that would be incredible insulation. It would be beautiful to grow food on. You know, I think there is enough land on everybody's roof. There's enough square footage on every roof in every home that people live in North America to feed their family. So there's another eccentric statement, but think about it. So it's a completely different culture, but why don't we explore some of these things a little bit differently? You know, it's not going to happen in the next 10 years, but why couldn't we change our culture in the next 100? It would be it would be good. It would be a good thing ecologically. It would be a good thing for human health. And it wouldn't be that hard to do. I can't think of an environmental impact where that would be a bad thing. And if there is, then don't do it in an environmentally bad way. Do it in a good way. So, yeah. Okay, I think we've had a good discussion tonight. I do just want to remind you that I love xeriscaping, but we can't use rocks and stones and gravel and sand and bare earth, because we are going from one extreme of using too much water to pushing the rain away. We need the middle ground of keeping the ground cooler so that the rain clouds that do come across our skies, they will condense above us and we get rain. So let's get more rain. Let's fix the rain cycles by cooling the surfaces of the earth. And I don't know why we're not teaching this stuff in kindergarten, because kindergartners can understand it. Okay, I'm going to close this down for the night. Thank you for watching. And if you need to contact me for any reason, go back through this to the slide where you can see my website, and all my contact info is there. And let's move forward and turn this world into a beautiful, green, growing, wonderful, luscious place with all kinds of nutrient dense food. Thank you for being on tonight, and good night.